Good afternoon, everyone. This is Matthew Tebow. I'm coming to you from Hong Kong, the Education University of Hong Kong. And my task as part of our panel today is to imagine the near future of the history of music education. Where are we headed? You can see I'm headed on a very diverse MTR train in Hong Kong. Our field? Well, you can tell from looking at this conference program, there's a rapid rise to address issues of access, diversity, and inclusion using theoretical constructs like decolonization, intersectionality, social justice, and more. This is a great development. But how specifically is historical research changing? I note changes on two fronts. First, celebrating the diversity in our history. And second, confronting the troubling aspects of our history more directly. I'll talk about both of those. First, we're telling histories that were previously omitted. We're more inclusive, more diverse, and more interesting. The most read article right now on the website for the Journal of Historical Research in Music Ed is a narrative history of African American marching band. JHRME has published really nice pieces by Phil on the New York Institution for the Blind or the Austin High School Girls Band. Practitioners and undergraduates might enjoy stuff in MEJ like Jean Ann Nichols' history of the Air Women of Note and Dr. McCarthy's piece on the young musicians of Motown, which really does a great job of showing Detroit and music education and industry. I'll also note that we have a forthcoming issue, the Journal of Historical Research. I'm on the board. That's why I say we have a forthcoming issue, edited by Marvelene Moore, guest editor, and Dr. McCarthy, all devoted to African American music education. Keep an eye out for that. Given our time, I'm going to move right on. We're also confronting the troubling aspects of our history better than before. What I mean by that is something maybe a little bit like this. Melissa Grady in 2020 published a history of George Heller's historical work. And here's a paragraph. Heller also taught his students how not to do historical research. His infamous example involved an interview with Charles Leonard, who you'll know helped to found one of the key graduate programs at Illinois. During the interview, George gasped when Leonard commented that he had ironed his mother's KKK uniform. I'll give you a moment to gasp yourself. After that, he insisted during interviews his students should not insert their own opinions. They should instead just let the subject talk. Now, can you get a more troubling image than ironing the KKK robes, right? And I would argue that Heller himself might have continued ironing those robes because he actually wrote an entire book about Leonard, but this is all that remained of the KKK. He puts it in the background. This was the era of the KKK, which prospered in those intolerant times. He disconnects Leonard from his own mother and from her connection to the KKK. So the second theme I'm talking about is how we need to engage with these troubling aspects. Stop ironing the robes and get in there ourselves whenever we find things like this. I have a research grant right now from the Hong Kong General Research Fund looking at sound recordings and appreciation. And I came across examples that led me to add in questions specifically about Black, Indigenous people of color and how their music was represented. Let's take a look at a couple primary source examples really quickly. Listening lessons in music was one of the 5 most popular appreciation texts. It said that in 6th grade, teachers could include Indian and Negro music because in prior grades they'd learned about folk tunes and other primitive music. It specifically recommended that teachers play the song Dagger Dance, which was on Victor Records. And you can see here a little bit about what they were saying would happen when you played it. And let's listen to 20 seconds of that record. And you can see that teacher anticipates students calling it jerky and saying it was repetitious, and the teacher is supposed to answer that those people had no way to write music, and that's why they couldn't remember a more complicated tune. Oh, okay. So they weren't really appreciating songs like this. They instead were talking about the music of other people that sounds peculiar to, quote, our ears, and that this music belonged to the earliest people. And of course, the more modern and progressive people were, we can guess who they were. The game was rigged from the start. Dagger Dance was written by Victor Herbert, of course, and he admitted in an interview with the New York Times that this was simply an imitation with no Indian theme, because he felt that Indian themes were short and unharmonized. And he said, I've tried to get the effect without using the thing itself. You notice that previous image that looked like a Native American woman. Of course, it was Scottish soprano Mary Garden performing at the Metropolitan Opera House. And throughout the primary source materials I'm examining, I find a very similar treatment of Black Indigenous people of color and their music. Frances Elliott Clark, the first president of what is now NAfME, she produced, working for Victor, a booklet, The Victrola in Americanization. And if I ask you what American looks like, you can see there's your Native Americans. But they're becoming American by dancing Swedish folk dance. And on the right-hand side, you see Chinese and Japanese children dancing the Irish jig. So becoming American involves people of color doing white things. White people, they're depicted as going to church. African Americans, their music is represented largely through minstrel music. This is 1920. And the suggestion that songs like Old Zip Coon and Old Black Joe and other songs that are from the minstrel tradition, often by white composers, like is it Dixon or Dan Tucker and Stephen Collins Foster. It's very hard to conclude anything, but I'm in this ongoing project. My early sense is that records brought more diverse music, but they kept it subordinate through new discourses that were invented to relegate this music as lesser, primitive, illiterate, and lacking in good music's markers of European classical music notation and harmony. In other words, I'm trying to demonstrate how appreciation was also a project of devaluing music, of what so-called others. And I want to ask what residue of that approach remains today. You can see Frances Elliott Clark said, they have ears to hear and hear not. And what I want us to try to do now is to hear our own problematic aspects while continuing to celebrate things. So I would conclude that the future of our past needs both to better capture the diverse beauty while admitting the many troubling aspects in music education practice. Thank you for your kind attention. Here's a little sunrise, which is just about right now in Hong Kong. It's almost 6 a.m. That's over Lion Rock in Tai Po. Thanks again, and I look forward to our discussion.